Cheer if you think John did a better job than Jason. They love you, Jason. That's the first time anyone's ever taken a shot at Jason and it didn't go anywhere. So anyway, here I want to say thanks to our worship team, man. What an incredible time of worship. You ever out? First of all, I'm already saucy in here. I'm all sweaty. But you ever have those moments? I was worshiping. I had that moment where I was like, man, I think we're touching something divine this morning. Like we're touching God. And so I think it's already started. And as we walk through the rest of this morning, I think we're gonna experience something in the presence of God that many of you guys, it's gonna change your life forever. And here's the crazy part: it's not anything I'm gonna say. At the end, we're gonna finish, and we're gonna give you a few minutes to hear what God is saying to you. And when He speaks to you, it's going to set you free. It's going to change your life. And so I'm going to do my best to get out of the way this morning, talk quick and disappear, and then we're going to bring the team back. But I do want to just kind of start by sharing some information. Here's the state of affairs. Here's where things are as we start. Here's the cool thing is when you share where you are at the beginning and you're real about where you are at the beginning, then you know how much has changed by the time you get to the end. And so sometimes we want to believe we're better than we are. How many of you guys are in that spot today? Like, I'd like to believe I'm in better shape than I am. But if we're real and if we start by saying, because sometimes we don't want to admit where we really are because we're convinced that nothing is ever going to change. And so at least we can keep a positive perspective. But when you have real hope that something's going to change, then you can be honest and say, here's where I am. And so here's the state of affairs. You know that 20% of the baby boom generation, who are now 60 plus, have already had mental health diagnosis. If you're baby boomers, raise your hand. If you're a baby boomer, then good. Okay. So 20% of people 60 and up have had mental health diagnosis. If you're a Gen Xer like me, I tried to deny it for a while. There was an Oregon Trail generation. It's like a 3-year generation. Anyway, I didn't want to be a Gen Xer. But anyway, I watched a series on Netflix. I found out it's true. I'm a Gen Xer. And so anyway, if you're a Gen Xer, you're probably in your 40s or your 50s. 21% of Gen Xers have had mental health diagnosis. Now, if you're here in the room today and you're a millennial, you probably still have your hair. You can probably still walk across a building without being out of breath. There's all kinds of benefits. But if you're a millennial, there's a 41% chance you've already had a mental health diagnosis in your life. Did you see what happened there between Gen X and millennial? Doubled. And it gets even worse. If you're from Gen Z, 42% of Gen Z who are 11 to 26 years old have already had mental health diagnosis. That's more than twice as many people in a third of the lifespan. So it's more than twice as bad. It's probably more like 6 times as bad. And of those numbers, 80 to 90% have been diagnosed with depression or anxiety, and they have symptoms of that regularly in their life. And so I know that some of you are like devil's advocate because I've kind of told those statistics to a few people already, and the first response is, well, we're a lot better at finding that stuff now. Raise your hand if you were thinking that. Well, we're better at finding it. In that same time period that I've just quoted numbers from, suicide rates, not numbers, rates per 100,000 people, okay? Suicide rates have more than tripled. So it's not just that we're better at finding it. It's not just that we have names for things. All those things are true. We're better at finding it. We have names for things we didn't have names for. But 3 times as many people today are taking their own life as than were when the baby boomers were coming up. There's a serious problem. You see, the adjectives that describe our culture now are depressed and anxious. And I'd ask you to raise your hand, but still too early and you're not comfortable yet, right? Like, that's the other people that have that, right? But man, that's why cell phone use is the way that it is, because that's like a little pill for our anxiousness. And so you get anxious, you got to pull it out and get a few endorphins, like, nobody liked my stuff. I put it back in, you know. Check the other social media, still no calls, it's terrible. And so there's just all these things that display our constant anxiety. right? Anxious and depressed is how we have become. And here's the crazy thing, is that we're freer than we've ever been, right? We're free to do anything we want to do. And we really thought, way back in the 60s, those baby boomers thought, if we can just get rid of all these restrictions, get rid of all these, the man looking down on us, to get rid of even Christian, biblical restrictions, if we can just be free to do whatever we want to do, then we'll finally be happy. And yet things are so much worse. We're freer to do anything we want to do, but we have more. Back when the baby boomers were coming up, the average middle class size home was 869 square feet was a middle class home. You know what it is for my generation growing up? It's 2,400 square feet. We have more. So I get so tired of hearing that. Like, disappearing middle class. They disappeared into their giant houses. And so, we have more than we've ever had. We're walking around. If you have anything from the 3 generations back of the newest iPhones, if you have that, raise your hand. The last 3 generations. You're walking around with more computing power in your pocket than what they used to put people on the moon. Right? And Stephen doesn't believe that happened. But anyway, and so I'm just kidding. So, no, he does. And so, here's what I'm saying, is that life is better than it's ever been on the outside. We've got more going for us than we ever have had on the outside. We're more broken on the inside than we've ever been. And so depressed and anxious is who we are. But I want to tell you something. God is here today to fight on your behalf. And it's more than just information. We've been praying as a church for months. It was probably more than 6 months ago that God directed us to do this series. So what God is doing in your life today, just know the wheels have been in motion for a long time. Right? God is here to fight on your behalf. So today, I just want to kind of give you a quick outline of what's going to happen today and next week and the week after. Today is all about the presence and the power of God. Because that's the hope today, is that God is going to show up and do something that we can't really even quantify in your heart. And when we're done today, you're going to be like, I don't really know what happened, but things are different. So today is about the power and the presence of God. Next week is about the processes. Because here's just the reality. Scripture lays it out. The Bible teaches it. Mental health experts. We actually have a mental health expert with us. Casey is here. He's one of our licensed counselors. He's been working with a lot of you guys. He's just a good friend of ours. And so he's going to actually be sharing next week. We're going to tag team preach, and we're going to be sharing some real processes. Because it's one thing to have like a moment with God. It's another thing to begin to change how you walk through your day. And that's how lasting change happens. And so next week's all about the process, and the third week is all about the people. Because you weren't meant to do this thing alone. And so the people that you choose to cut loose in your life in the next few weeks are going to make a huge difference. And the people that you choose to pull close to you are going to make a huge difference. And so that's the next few weeks. And then Jason and John already mentioned the depression small group, the Out of the Cave small group. I encourage you, if this is something that you would all deal with, or you love someone that does, jump into that group. Jump into that group, because you need to walk alongside other people. And you need to do this over the course of a few weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, and really kind of get some good momentum in the right direction. Right, so I encourage you to really consider seriously doing that. And then Casey has actually written, I don't know if the book has been released yet, Breaking the Chains of Anxiety. He does a one-day workshop. And so the first Saturday in May will be the Breaking the Chains of Anxiety workshop. I encourage you to take advantage of that as well. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the next 3-4 weeks. But if that describes you at all, or it's someone that you love, I really encourage you to drink deeply, take advantage of all of it. If sometimes what happens is we get a little bit of relief, and then we kind of go, okay, that's good enough. Right? And so what happens is the devil's got his foot on our throat, and we're ready to go under. And what we'll do is we'll kind of get it just a little bit so we can get a good breath. And instead of then throwing him the rest of the way off of us, we go, okay, I'm good for another little bit. And so that's why we're taking so much time with this, is that I want to see you guys and us and all of us get free. And a month from now, for so many of you, life is going to be entirely different than it was today. You started today depressed and anxious, and you're going to look back and you're going to go, I can't even believe how different my life is than when I started. And so, here's the thing. That one of the craziest side effects of this whole thing, depression, anxiety, really any mental health struggle, one of the craziest things is that so many people suffer it, and yet when we're suffering, we feel completely alone. And it's so profound. Those numbers, right? When you start adding that together, like, what's 20% plus 21% plus 22% plus 40% plus, you know what that means? Everybody's depressed. Everybody's anxious. Everybody's walking around less than ideal, and nobody wants to say anything because they feel like they're the only broken person. But you're not alone. I want to tell you something. You're not alone in this room, right? Like, these are some of the best people. If you're newer to this church, these are some of the best people in St. Louis. I'm not just saying that because I work here and they pay my salary, but it's part of the reason. No, I'm being honest. I'm being honest. I'm still good looking at this point in my life. I could go anywhere. Right? These are some of the best people in St. Louis. And so if you'll not find a bunch of people that really kind of have life figured out and know what it is to love other people and connect to other people. And even in this room, you're not alone. There's people carrying the weight of depression, anxiety, things you haven't even heard of. You're not alone among those who know and love Jesus. I'm going to do something real quick. Everyone close your eyes. All right? Close your eyes for a second. And I want you to be honest. It's okay. You're among friends. If you're in the room and you have, or you're right now, if you have experienced or right now are experiencing depression, anxiety, or anything of that sort, I want you to just gently slip your hand up. All right, just hold it up for a second. I'll give a few more people a chance to be honest. All right, now I want you to open your eyes and look around. You're not alone. You're not alone. It's almost the whole room. We're going to have a hard time in a few minutes. We're going to ask people to pray with people. Everyone's going to need to pray for themselves first. God, heal me, and then heal them. Right? You're not alone. You're not alone in this room. You're not alone among those who love Jesus. You're not alone among those loved by Jesus. And you're not even alone among the characters of the Bible. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the book of Ephesians, chapter 1, verses 18 and 19 say this, and this is what we think is going to happen through this series. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he's called you. What that's saying is that God has invited you into hope. But what needs to happen is the eyes of your heart need to be enlightened. You need to be given spiritual vision this morning so that you can see the way there. The path needs to be illuminated. So I pray the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he's called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for those who believe. That's what's available for you this morning. Incomparably great power. The glorious riches that he has as an inheritance for you. One of the things of depression is that it whispers to you and says, you're not worthy. You're not good enough. You need to settle for second best. The fact that God hasn't wiped you out yet, that's your reward. If you just make it to the end of the race, that's the best you can hope for. But he says, no. There's a glorious inheritance and incomparable power for those who believe. That's what he has for you. And here's the reason I point that verse out, is that in the verse it's really clear that hope is available, but it's not inevitable. And that's why he's praying this prayer. He says, I pray that the eyes of your heart might be enlightened so that you can see the way to walk into what God actually has available to you. It was bought through Jesus. So it doesn't matter how messed up you are. It doesn't matter how broken you are. It doesn't matter how many things you've done wrong. It was bought through what Jesus did on your behalf. It's your inheritance. And so he's praying that we would see the way forward to walk into that. And so what we're going to do in the next 15, 20 minutes, that's a statement of faith. It never. And so anyway, what we're going to do is that we're going to look at the journey of an Old Testament prophet named Elijah. And what happened is Elijah was this amazing dude. God's power was at work in his life in crazy, phenomenal ways all the time. I mean, how many of you guys, you don't really even know that much about the Bible, but you've heard of Elijah? Raise your hand, right? Lots of us. Some of you are named after Elijah. You're like, I don't even know what he did, but I'm named after him, right? And so here, all these years later, his name is still around. He's an important figure. But we're going to see the moment in his story where he sinks into a pit of despair and crippling depression, and he even wants to die. And then we're going to see God lift him out of that and carry him through to the other side. And so all of this takes place in the book of 1 Kings, chapters probably 17 through 20. So I encourage you, we're going to camp in this for the next few weeks. And so if you want to find something to read in the Bible, like, hey, I'd love to read the Bible, don't know where to start, here's a good place to start. You'll be queued up on what we're talking about for the next few weeks. But to set the scene, this is way back thousands of years ago in ancient Israel, okay? They were the people of God in the world, but what had happened is this is a dark and turbulent time in their history. The worship of Baal, this false god, this idol, had taken hold in Israel, and it's a grotesque thing. I can't really even describe to you because I would blush and embarrassment for all the things that they actually did at the worship of Baal. There was violent, terrible things, gross things, disgusting things, and it brought terrible, terrible brokenness to the land. It was a horrible time in Israel's history. But how many of you guys know this? How many of you guys have ever done something damaging to yourself but thought, if I just do it different, better, more, then the good's going to come? You ever do that? Go ahead and raise your hand. It's all right. Yeah, we do that. And so they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, yeah, that's what happened, is that they were going, maybe this will help. And they did it, and things got worse. Like, well, we just got to do it longer. And they did it, and things got worse. Like, well, I'm going to do it a little bit better. I'm going to add a lime to it. Then it's going to get better, right? Whatever it was, you just tweak it a little bit, and then the good's going to come. And so things got worse and worse and worse. And so what God did is he raised up this prophet named Elijah, and he filled him with the Holy Spirit, and specifically with crazy boldness and power. This guy was like, no nonsense. You didn't want to mess with him. God gave him a hard nose. He was like, I'm not afraid to stick my nose in and tell you what you don't want to hear. How many of you guys know something? Like, I think I know an Elijah. But anyway, and so that's who Elijah was, right? God made him this voice calling out to his people to repent. God's people, by and large, had all gone the wrong direction. And so Elijah's job was to constantly say, you're sinning. You're sinning. See that terrible thing in your life? That's a result of sin. See that terrible thing in your life? That's a result of sin. Right? Made him super popular. He got invited to all the parties, okay? Everyone liked him on social media. But anyway, he confronted the terrible sins of God's people, and even the kings and the queens, which back then would get you killed. Right? And so he was sent as like the moral compass of God's people in a very backwards time. And so that's kind of who he was. And so what happened, though, is God gave his life crazy, miraculous power. There was constantly these huge miracles coming in his life, and it was so that God could demonstrate time and time again what he's saying is true, what he's saying is true. You should listen, you should pay attention, but people didn't listen. They didn't pay attention. And eventually people just got tired of Elijah pronouncing judgment. Like, this guy, how do I block him, right? There wasn't Facebook back then. They couldn't defriend him. He just kept showing up, right? And one king and queen in particular really hated Elijah. There was a king named Ahab and his wife named Jezebel. There's some people that never named their kid. Like, some people in the Bible, everybody's an Elijah. Lots of Adams, lots of Peters. You don't meet very many Jezebels, okay? And so not a lot of women naming their kids. If you're thinking about it, I'd advise against it. So anyway, and so Ahab and Jezebel really hated Elijah because he was this constant squeaky wheel, calling them out, trying to turn them in a different direction. These two were the most evil rulers that Israel ever had. So during their reign, the people of God, the Jews, actually had 450 prophets of Baal on the national payroll. Like, let that sink in. The people of God had 450 prophets of Baal. It was the state-sanctioned religion during their reign. And you have the internet. You can go look it up later, what happened. Just make sure there was no images involved. But it was bad stuff, what happened with the prophets of Baal. All right? And so then on top of that, Ahab and Jezebel started this annihilation campaign. They were seeking out and capturing and executing the prophets of God. Those who were still speaking out for God, they were killing them off just little by little by little, and there was almost none left in the land. And so if you still held to the truth, you were just marginalized, then you were just completely done away with. So they're trying to change the page in Israel completely. So any prophets that were left had gone into hiding. There was actually some people who were sneaking food to prophets in a cave. It was just crazy. And so prophets were in hiding, all of them except Elijah. He's the crazy one who is willing to swim upstream, right? And so it gets so bad, though. They've killed so many prophets. God speaks to Elijah. He says, it's time to really crack down, Elijah. I want you to tell everybody that it's not going to rain in Israel for 3.5 years. And then the song played, and there's no rain. Anyway, and so I just want someone. Sorry, I'm distracted now. And so no rain for 3.5 years, which is significant because Baal was supposed to produce rain. That's what the worship of him was all about. So God's like, all right, you're going to worship this guy instead of me because he's going to bring rain. I'm going to show you who's in charge of the rain. There's no rain. And so it's okay for a little while, but then crops start failing. Rivers start drying up. Animals start dying. And people even start dying. Like God's really making a point here. And so imagine for 3.5 years what would happen in a whole country if there was no rain at all. And that's what happened. I mean, there is widespread famine. There's widespread starvation. There's complete economic collapse. And during this time, Ahab and Jezebel go on the hunt. And they're extra trying to kill all the prophets. And they're especially looking for Elijah. If we kill Elijah, the rain comes back. He's the one that messed everything up. And the people begin to believe the narrative too. Elijah, you're just a troublemaker. If you'd stop saying all this stuff, life would be fine. You're just making us feel bad. You're the one that's making life bad, not us. And that's the narrative that's happening. So God actually moves Elijah. Right? God kind of takes him to remote places to protect him. And so he takes him out in the middle of nowhere next to a river. And it's super crazy, like miracles every single day. Birds. It says that ravens flew overhead. We don't know where they came from, where they found the food, but they found food and they're flying and they would drop it right where he was. And so for a long time, probably 1.5 years or better, he's there. He's camping. He's just camping and he's got like Raven Dash just dropping the food on him every day. He eats it. And the thing is, I just thought of that too. That wasn't in my notes. So anyway, that's what's going on. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I know it sounds cool, but I want you to think about an 18-month camping trip. I want you to think about eating what dirty, nasty birds just drop on you for 18 months, right? And so he's living, but it ain't living, okay? And so he's alive. Everyone else is dying. He's alive, and he's out in the middle of nowhere where no one can find him, and then finally that stream dries up. So God has another plan to care for him and sustain him. So he actually takes him to a foreign country, to a city called Zarephath, and there's this widow there. And this widow, because again, it's been a famine everywhere, right? So the no rain has made life difficult for everyone, everywhere. And there's this widow and her son are actually starving to death. She's got enough stuff left at home to make one last meal. And so she's getting some water, and she's going to make this meal, and then her and her son are just going to starve after that. That's her plan. And so Elijah sees her. He's like, hey, could you get me a cup of water, and could you make me some food? And she tells him the story. She's like, what do you mean make you some food? Ain't nobody got no food. Who are you talking to? Get your own sandwich, right? And so like she tells him this. And so he says, listen, if you take care of me, you're going to be fine. And so this woman has faith. And so she makes food for Elijah first, then for her and her son. And then every day after that, the food is still there to make. And it's never a lot. It's just enough. And every day for probably a year and a half, this is going on, right? And everyone around them is starving and dying, and they've always got just enough. And again, that's a crazy, can you imagine, for the first month, every time you look, you're like, dude, that was empty yesterday. Now it's got food in it, and then you empty it again, and then the next day, like, dude, there's food again. It would be crazy, right? And just so you know, that's the only time it's necessary to take pictures of your food and put it on the internet. But anyway, and so they kind of keep going, right? They kind of keep going, and it seems like it's going to be really, really, really hard, and it is hard, right? Imagine this is a tough season. They're barely scraping by, right? Imagine if every day the food that you took out of your cupboard was the very last of it. And that's what they lived with every day for that season. And they watched as people everywhere were dying. Animals were, everything was just falling apart. And remember the narrative all during this season through the whole region is Elijah. They actually changed his name to the troublemaker of Israel. When people would see him, they're like, there's the troublemaker, right? Which I think that was my name when I grew up anyway. But anyway, and so, troublemaker of Israel, everything is your fault. And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, it gets worse. This widow that's been caring for him, her son dies. Right? Can you imagine that? You're the one that pronounced the no rain. And then this woman that's been caring for you for this year and a half, you watch as even her son experiences the downstream effects of the judgment that you had to declare from God. The son dies. And so I'm going to read the verse where it says this. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Imagine that moment. Her words show us the burden that Elijah has been carrying all this time. Now, there's good news. God actually raises the boy from the dead, right? It's a crazy story. We don't have time to get into it. If you're reading it on your own, you'll read it. God raises the boy from the dead, but the thing is, the circumstances that brought his death still haven't changed. The drought's still going. The famine's still going. Everything is still terrible. So even with the miracle, everyone's still in the exact same situation they were before. So I want you to imagine, just for a second, put yourself in the place of Elijah. Just imagine as you see all of this carnage in the world around you. Everyone's been saying it's your fault for long enough that you probably believe it's your fault at this point. Right? And here's the thing. This is, 3.5 years. And I just want to take a second to break from the story. Here's one of the things about depression, anxiety, all this kind of stuff, is that long periods of stress or of hypervigilance or of busyness, that's what leads to depression. You can only sustain an adrenaline-fueled life for so long. You can only run on empty for so long. You can only bear weights that nobody can bear alone for so long before something breaks. It's unsustainable, right? There is a cost when you go through seasons like that. And so 3.5 years go by. And finally, God tells Elijah, it's time for rain. And Elijah's doing like the rain dance, he's ready for it. So he sends word to the king. He says, King, guess what? It's time. I want you to assemble all of Israel. Get all those prophets of Baal there. You be there. Here's the meeting point. We're going to have a rain party. And so they all show up, and Elijah has been busy. He set up a test. They built 2 different altars with wood and all this kind of stuff, and they cut up some animals, and they put some animals on each altar, and he says, we're going to have a sacrifice. But here's the thing. If this God is real, he'll be able to light his own sacrifice. And so here's what I want you guys to do. You 450 prophets of Baal can go first. Pray for as long as you want. And if Baal is real, fire will fall from the heavens and consume the sacrifice. They pray all day. Nothing. And I like Elijah. He's like, pray a little louder. Maybe he's in the bathroom, right? You know, he's just kind of throwing some fun at him. They're getting more and more desperate. They're like cutting themselves. They're crying out. They're doing anything to get Baal's attention. And maybe some of you have been there. You've been desperate for so long. And you're trying anything and everything. You've done things that you're ashamed of. You've done things that made the problem go from bad to worse, but you were so desperate that you would try anything for relief. That's where these prophets of Baal were, and the day comes and it goes and there's no fire. And then Elijah's like, this is really unfair because Baal's fake. And like God's real, so I want to make it fair. So go get all this water. I want you to soak the entire sacrifice with water, fill up the trenches with water, and then he just says, God, do it. And light fire falls from heaven. The altar erupts. It consumes the sacrifice. Even the stones, even the water is consumed by the fire. So it's kind of like, I guess God's real. Right? I mean, is that like the takeaway that you guys would have? Anybody else? Like, would anybody else watch this and be like, I don't know, I'm not convinced that Baal's fake at this point and that God is real? Right? And so all of the Israelites, they're convinced. And so then they like, okay, let's take care. They grab the 450 prophets of Baal who've led them astray. They actually kill them all, right? And they declare, that's it. We're going to follow God again. And Elijah's like, yeah, baby. And then Elijah's so excited. He's praying, and he's like, the rain is getting ready to come. Everybody better go home. Can you imagine that? Like, it hasn't rained for 3.5 years, and you're like so confident. You're like, you better run. It's going to be a lot, okay? And so he actually runs. He outruns the king, getting back to the palace, and he's waiting for the king at the palace. The king arrives in his chariot. And I want you to understand where Elijah's got to be in this moment. He's like excited. It's going to be over. Everyone's repented. The king saw the thing. He's got to give in now. He's got to repent. He's going to invite me back into the palace. I'm going to be the official advisor. Everything is going to be better now. And then the queen sends word. You tell Elijah if he's still alive this time tomorrow, I'll be dead. I'm going to kill him. And something happens in this moment. Something breaks inside of Elijah. The rain has come. The water, the ground is being restored. Everything. The people have repented. Everything seems like it's better. The only problem is the king and the queen haven't repented. But this long period of stress and hypervigilance, and he thought he was at the finish line, and then it wasn't. How many of you guys have ever been there? Then it wasn't the finish line. And you think, how can this not be over? How can I still have no money? How can this relationship still be this broken? How can I still feel this way? How can this still be what's happening? And that's where Elijah was, and he just sinks into a pit of despair and depression, and it just seizes him. And then he does something crazy. He kind of just runs away. Something broke inside of him. Right? And so here's the crazy thing, is that depression causes Elijah to make a critical error here. And that error is isolation. It didn't mention him, but he's had like a right-hand guy with him the whole time. Right? So he's had an assistant, a servant, a prophet junior that's been his companion through all of this. And so he goes to the city and he kind of fires his assistant. And it's an act of mercy, he thinks. He's like, listen, I got nothing for you. You just stay here. And then he wanders like a crazy person out in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness. And he's out there just wandering like a madman. And he just didn't want to be around anyone. He didn't think anybody could help. How often do we think that, right? You're not feeling right. You're not feeling good. And what do? You avoid everybody. You think they can't help. They're not going to be able to fix it. They don't have the solutions. I don't want to burden them with my problems. I don't want to bum everybody out. There's lots of different lines we tell ourselves, but what we do is we isolate. And I want to tell you this really plainly. Isolating ourselves is a trap from Satan. It's a trap. Right? And there's lots of things you can hear. Nobody will understand. That won't help. They'll just judge you. They won't understand. All of those are whispers from your enemy in your ear. Because here's the thing. When you're alone, you'll believe damaging things about yourself and about your situation and about others. And here's why. Because you're not seeing things clearly. The eyes of your heart have been darkened. You may think you understand, but you don't really understand. You don't see the truth. You're seeing a darkened version of the truth. When you're alone in these circumstances, you will unquestionably accept perspectives that are not reality. Everything will be worse. You'll say things like, I always fail. How many of you guys have ever told yourself that? Be honest, it's okay. You know what? Did you get dressed today? Your pants are on, they're buttoned, your shirt's pulled down. What a success. And I'm being silly, but the truth is there's tons of successes. But what do we see when that enemy lies to us? We only see the failures. I always fail. I'm so ugly. Nobody will ever love me. No matter how hard I try, I can't lose this weight. I'm just always going to be fat. This is just who I am. I'm such a worthless sinner. I'm never going to get past this, never going to get over this. If anyone knew what I was really like, they'd all hate me. I'm just so stupid. I'll never do anything good. I've always been this way, and it's never going to change. That's what we hear when we isolate ourselves, because we don't have a real perspective. We have a perspective that's been darkened by our depression and by all these other things, and it's our enemy whispering to us. And right now, the enemy has Elijah right in the crosshairs, and he's trying to take him out. So Elijah's wandering in the wilderness with these kind of crazy thoughts in his head. He's alone, he's in the middle of nowhere, and he lays down under a tree and he asks God to kill him. He's like, God, just end my life. Right? And these dark thoughts are just going round and round. I'm the only good person left. My whole life and my whole ministry at this point, they're pointless. It's all been for nothing. And here's the crazy thing. Who's the only person that's mad at him at this point? Jezebel. All of Israel has repented. All of Israel has said, God, you're right. They killed all the prophets of Baal, everything. But like he's so broken at this point. Like his view from the inside doesn't match what's going on outside. The rain has come. Everything's going to be better. But he doesn't see what's really going on around him. I'm just a failure. It's all been a waste. Just so that you know what those thoughts are, that's called rumination. We're going to talk more about that next week. We don't have time to get into it this week. But rumination is so destructive and it's so deceptive. And that's really the biggest voice in our ear when we're walking through these seasons, isn't it? We hear from ourselves these ruminating thoughts 10 times more than we hear anything positive from the outside. So Elijah falls asleep with these ruminating thoughts going on in his mind. And here's the crazy part. He wakes up to a legit angel who has cooked him food. Like physically, it doesn't even just say, like a lot of times angels just make things appear like, And this angel legitimately like makes a fire and like, probably kills something and cooks it and then nudges him, literally nudges him, like, get up, right? And he wakes up and the angel says, here's some food, eat it. And this is my favorite part. He goes, okay. And he eats it and then he rolls back over and goes back to sleep like it's a Tuesday night. Like, okay, this is just what happens now, I guess, right? And so he eats it. And then the angel just sits with him and just watches over him for a whole night as he sleeps. And then he wakes him up again. And he says, here, eat. This journey that you're going on is going to be huge, and you're going to need your strength. And we'll get more into that again in the next few weeks. We don't have time for that. But there's something so powerful in this, and that's what we're going to talk about processes next week, is that Elijah's been neglecting himself. And the angel's like, for right now, let's just focus on a couple of things. Let's eat. And then let's sleep. And then let's eat. And then let's sleep. And then let's eat. And anyway, we'll get into that next time, so we won't have to do that today. But here's the thing. Elijah finally, he's eaten and he's slept enough, and now he's slept enough. That's good English. And so he's finally ready, and he's decided something. God didn't tell him this. He's going to go to Mount Sinai, where it all started for the Israelites, where God appeared to Moses and gave the law, and he's trying to get as far away from everything as he can. He's going to go. That's like his escape point, his lake house. I'm just going to go there, and that's going to be my retirement. I'm just going to retire on Mount Sinai. It's going to be awesome. I don't have to deal with these people, right? And so Mount Sinai is a 40-day journey away. And so he's going to take this journey. And so he's really, again, here's where all the action is. Here's where the Jezebel and the king and all this stuff, here's where he should be taking care of business. But he's trying to get as far away as he can. He's trying to escape. How many of you guys have ever tried to escape? We do that, don't we? Like for us, it's not Mount Sinai. It's like, I'm just going to pull these covers back over my head. I'm not ready for the day. I can't do it. It's when you call in sick, even though you're not sick. You just call, is there a call in depressed? Is there a call in anxious, right? And I'm just going to call in today. It's when you cancel with those friends. You're like, I know I really do need to be around them, but I just can't. I just can't. It's skipping church when you know that's what you actually need. That's going to Sinai. You're escaping. You're avoiding people. You're freezing on the edge of a task or a project. It's like, I know all I got to do is just do it, and then I'll feel better, but I can't make myself do it. It's Sinai. You're disappearing. You're trying to get away from it. And so here's the crazy thing. God walks with him, goes with him all the way to Sinai in the complete opposite direction of where he's supposed to be. But God goes with him even though he's not supposed to be there. And I want to leave you just with that for a minute. Like a lot of you have walked a lot of directions that you knew you shouldn't have walked in. And even though you didn't belong there, God walked there with you. And he was there with you at your side saying, eat, sleep. It's okay. We're gonna get this figured out. And that's what happens. God goes with him to Sinai, and he collapses into sleep in a cave. God lets him rest again in the cave and then wakes him up. And then God asks him a question. And he says, Elijah, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And here's something interesting. Why did God ask him that? And it's really simple. It's because what Elijah really needed and what he was doing were inconsistent. What he knew needed to happen and where he was and what he was doing, they didn't match. And so he's asking him, what are you doing here? Like everything's back there. Why are you here? And he asked him twice. And so anyway, but here's the thing. This is the core struggle when it comes to overcoming depression. And it's this. The things that we feel like doing the most are often the last things we actually need to be doing. How many of you guys have experienced that? And the things that are the hardest to make ourselves do are actually the things that will move us in the right direction. Right? And so our true needs and our actions are often in conflict when we're stuck in depression. We want friends, but we isolate. We want peace, but we dwell on negative thoughts. We want to feel better physically, but then we don't do the things that we know would foster it. We feel financially under pressure, but what do? We go spend more money. Right? Everything doesn't match. right? And Elijah knew what he needed. He knew what needed to be done, but he felt powerless to do it. And so here's the cool thing. Again, next week when we talk about process, it's going to be all about here's the things that we need to actually do. But today is all about the powerlessness to do it. See, I don't want to sit here and just throw a bunch of stuff on you. Here's what you should do. Here's what you know what you should do. You just feel powerless to do it. And so maybe before we go into all of that, we need to ask ourselves, like put ourselves in the place of Elijah and just ask, like, what am I doing here? Like, what things in my life are completely inconsistent with what I know I need and want? Like, what am I doing here? And when you're stuck in depression, though, you often lack the strength and the clarity to do what needs to be done. There's like this X factor that's missing. And so God tells Elijah, like what he's doing there, and he's just complaining about the past, and God's like, I didn't ask you why you're here. I asked you what you're doing here, right? And so they kind of go back and forth, and God's like, you're not getting it. Let me just show you something. And that's what God does a lot of the times. And so even now you're probably arguing, God's going to be like, all right, let me just show you something. And so God says, get out of the cave. And so he steps out of the cave, and I want you to stand before me on the mountain. And so he's standing on the mountain, and then God does something crazy. This terrible windstorm that the Bible says shattered the rocks. I know it stormed pretty good a few weeks ago, but I didn't see any rocks shatter, okay? And so this wind comes and just rips the face of the mountain apart. But something interesting, he's looking, and it says, somehow, we don't know how he knew, but it says the Lord was not in the wind. So God caused the wind, but his presence, his life-giving presence, wasn't in the wind. And then there was this earthquake, and the mountain's shaking, and things are crashing and quaking, and it says the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then there was a fire that swept across the mountain, and it says the Lord was not in the fire. And then so one of the things about Elijah is that these displays, they were dramatic, and this is what his life had been up until this point. It was dramatic displays of the power of God. He was used to seeing this kind of stuff. But there was something missing still, the presence of God. Then something unique happens that we never read about anywhere else in Elijah's life. We don't see it happen anywhere else. After the fire sweeps, and it says God's not in the fire, it says that there was like a gentle whisper, or almost like a gentle wind, almost like a breath, just blowing. And it said, the Lord was in the gentle whisper. He was there. And here's the crazy thing. Elijah's standing there, and it's one of those moments, and many of you have had these moments in the presence of God, where he wasn't sure if he heard it or if he felt it on the inside. Is this a physical phenomenon, or is this all just happening in here? I'm not sure, but there's something crazy happening. And it says that God was present in the whisper. And here's what's crazy, is that when Elijah hears this whisper, there's something so profound in this moment that it says he covers his face with his cloak, and he hides. He hides from everything that's around him. In this moment, God starts speaking quietly and intimately to Elijah's heart. And he's hearing the voice of God as a whisper in his soul. And the whisper of God actually breathes fresh life to Elijah's weary soul. And this is the turnaround moment in the story. This is when everything changes. The presence and the power of God are the X factor, right? This is the moment that turns everything in his story. It's the presence of God was ushered into that moment. And the question I'm going to ask, and we're going to be almost finished with this, is why would he cover his face? And here's why. Back in that time, they had this sincere belief that if you saw the actual face of God, you would die. That seeing God would be so intense that your physical body couldn't handle it and you would drop dead. And so what this is saying is that this man that called down fire from heaven and saw crazy, miraculous things happen all the time What happened in this gentle whisper was so powerful and so profound that it scared him to death. And he thought, this God is here. Any second, I am going to see his face. And so he's hiding himself from the presence of God. And it's so intense that he's shielding himself from it. And in this moment, inside of his cloak, he's hearing the whisper of God in his heart as he tells him everything that he needs to hear. It didn't look nearly as powerful as all the other things, but this was the most powerful and the most profound experience of Elijah's storied life. And here's the thing, is that we're never told what this whisper actually says, and that's on purpose. And it's because we're supposed to insert ourselves at this point in the story. Because what Elijah heard whispered to him wouldn't be helpful to you. The voice of God has a unique whisper for your life this morning, for you, in your situation, where you're at, right? God wants to speak to you. He wants to say, you know what? I know you've never felt loved, but I love you. All of this, it's for you. I've done it all for you. I love you. You never felt like enough, but I want you to know that you're enough. You're enough. Those things that happened to you, they weren't your fault. And they don't have to define the rest of your life. You're enough. You're beautiful. That's what he's whispering to some of you today. You're beautiful. All these other things, they're not who you are. They're not what you are. You're worthwhile just like you are. Even if no one else ever told you this, I'm your Father, and I'm proud of you. That's what he's saying to some of you this morning. You're not stupid. You're not worthless. You're a son. You're a daughter of the King. And whatever is being said, I don't know what was said to Elijah in that moment, but whatever is being said heals whatever is broken inside of Elijah. And something happened inside of Elijah that, here's the thing, it only makes sense once you experience it. Some of you probably already, before we even got into the prayer time, some of you are hearing God speaking those words to your heart. In a few minutes, we're going to pray with each other. God's going to speak those words into your heart. And you're going to experience it, and suddenly the whole thing's going to make sense. I've had moments like that in my own life where I felt so dark, so alone. I thought, I don't even see the purpose anymore. I don't see what's happening. I don't think God cares. I don't think God sees. And he just whispered in my soul. There was one time where it was so simple. He just said, I love you. And it was so distinct, though. It was one of those pull the cloak over my face moments. And it changed everything. Like, yeah, he loves me. All of this is for me. And so it makes sense once it happens, right? But the thing is, it wasn't even the actual words that makes the difference. It's the fact that God himself showed up. It's the fact that God himself breathed fresh life into Elijah's soul. The whisper of God changed everything for Elijah, and now he's ready for action. Now God's like, I want you to do this and do this. And Elijah's like, got it. He's like putting all this stuff back on, like, here we go. I'm going to take off. I'm going to head back there. Show me Ahab. Show me Jezebel. I'm going to go do it, right? God changed everything. But here's the thing. Before you can do all the things that you need to do, next week's going to be all about some practical stuff. But before you can do any of that, what you need is that gentle whisper of God in your soul. You need his presence. You need his power. You need him so close that you're afraid the intensity of this moment might be too much for you. That's what you need. I want to invite the band to come back as they do. That's what we're going to do. In the next few minutes, like we're 5 minutes from being done here, but that's what these next few minutes are about. So I want to encourage, I know sometimes when the band comes back, some of us kind of stir and move and take it as the moment to go. I want to encourage you, don't get antsy. Don't tune out. These next few minutes are why you came. This is why you came this morning. So what we're going to do is we're going to sing a song together, And then I'm going to come back and we're actually going to invite you. Like if that's something you've struggled with, something you felt, you're struggling with depression, you're feeling it, then we're going to invite you to raise your hand. And what's going to happen is that people have been preparing. They've been praying for you all week. They've been praying for you all week. And so they're going to be moving around. They're just going to put a hand on your shoulder, and it's nothing in them. What's going to happen is the presence of God is going to show up. And so all I want to do is don't pay attention to the people who pray with you. Don't pay attention to anything else. I want you to tune in. And what's going to happen is that whisper from God is going to come. And he's going to speak life to your heart and to your soul this morning. So I want you to kind of focus in on that. And so what will happen is we'll give some instructions. People will pray. And then when I feel like we're done, we'll circle back together. We'll sing through the song one more time. And then we'll be done, right? But I really want to encourage you, that whisper. Seek out that moment with the Lord this morning. He is going to whisper something to your heart. He's going to say, I love you. He's going to say, you're worth it all. He's going to say, it's going to be okay. You're not broken. You're not a mistake. I didn't mess up making you. I know that it hurts right now, but it's going to be okay. And that whisper is going to change everything for you. And so this is going to be that moment. So as we sing this song, I want you to almost imagine it like you're Elijah and you're heading to Sinai. You're journeying to that moment where you're going to get into the presence of God. And so I really encourage you to tune out the people around you and really focus in and use this song as your invitation into his presence, right? And what's going to happen is what we read at the beginning. I pray that the eyes of your heart will be enlightened so that you'll be able to know the hope that he's given you. In the next 5 minutes, I think that's going to happen for so many. Why don't you stand and we'll sing.